tifu by beating my wife and daughter. Obligatory. This happened about 18 years ago and, please, read the whole thing before passing judgment. First, though, a little backstory. My oldest child, my only daughter, was born in 1998. She's healthy, smart, witty, beautiful, and all the things a proud dad could hope for. At the time of this story, though, she was only about 3 years old. My second child, however, was not so lucky with the health issues. At 5 weeks old, he had a near-miss SIDS incident that left him with massive brain damage and a host of other issues that stemmed from that. At the point of this story, he was in the state's early intervention program, which meant that we as a family got extra assistance with a few things. My daughter got preferential treatment to get into early education programs and a few things like that. For the events of this story, he was, as I recall, with my parents this day. But that's how we came to be at the particular event where this TIFU occurred. These events happened sometime in early 2002. The early intervention program was having a dinner event for family members, and so my wife, daughter and I were all going to this event. Due to life being life, my wife and daughter were heading to the event from home and I was heading directly there from work, meeting up with them there. So, here we are, at an early intervention event sponsored by a state aid program, and the wife and I are chatting with director of this program, who is essentially a state-empowered agent to look after the welfare of special needs children and their families. We'll call her Jen for the sake of this story, which is definitely not her real name. My wife and I both like this state agent and were enjoying a conversation with her, and my daughter was making the most of the event that did have other kids but was mostly for adults. The conversation turned, however, when Jen asks my daughter what's on her mind. I swear, to my dying day, I will never forget exactly how my daughter replied to her. "Mommy doesn't like it when Daddy beats us." I hope understandably, speechless. I looked to my wife and she also had no clue where the hell that came from. We looked to Jen, who was looking back and forth between us, because she'd been working with us for a while and didn't think me capable of beating either of them. We turned back to my daughter to try to figure out what she was talking about. It seems that since we arrived at the event separately, one of us had to get there first, and that day it was me. When my wife arrived, she noticed my car already in the parking lot. Since we had joked about racing there, she said something to my daughter to the effect of, "Oh, darn, Daddy beat us." As in, I beat them to the event. I arrived first, but my daughter took the phrase "I beat them" to heart, and was happy to share it with Jen when she asked how my daughter was. After all, she was 3, why would she be worried about other meanings of the phrase? Once we figured that out, we shared a relieved if somewhat awkward laugh. The rest of the event came and went uneventfully. Honestly, I don't remember much of it after that, as I was still recovering from the OMFG shock at what my daughter had said before we figured it out. Considering that my daughter said that to a state employee, I'm very glad she knew us well enough to take the time to figure out what happened with us. But, yeah, I do still enjoy reminding my daughter every once in a while of how she did me wrong that day, but she usually rolls her eyes at me when I do. TLDR. My daughter told a state employee that I beat her and my wife to an event in a way that could have been easily misunderstood. Kids say the darndest things. I have had 2 similar occasions, so I know where you are coming from. Both at nursery. My mummy hurts me when the teacher asked how. She replied when she brushes my hair and it has got tangled. I play hide the sausage with Daddy. This turned out to be when she hides the chorizo sausage under the pasta at tea time. Oh my I just remembered I have another example of this. My friend was on the bus one day with her little boy. He was probably between 3 and 4 at this point. Suddenly blurted out, "Mummy was in bed with a soldier last night and now she's got a sore bum." Needless to say, my friend was mortified and more than a little confused. Later she remembered that her son had left some of those small plastic army toys in her bed and she had slept on top of one the night before. Pretty sure I laughed about that for like 6 months. When my son was mad at me when he was a toddler, he would scream out, "Help me! Help me from this man," which of course made me run away with him, so people would stare knives at me as I ran away with a struggling child. My brother was a bit of a terror when he was younger and we ended up having to go to family counseling sessions. One of the exercises involved asking my brother, my sister and me who we thought was our parents' favorite. We each said one of the others, apart from my sister who said Dad's favorite was Judy. The counselors glanced at the one-way mirror and made a note. Later on, we were asked what our parents do at home. My sister said my dad likes to sit on the sofa with Judy on his lap having kisses. He's always telling Judy how pretty she is. More glances at the window, more notes. One counselor goes outside, comes back, more questions. What else does Dad do with Judy? Sometimes when we get up for school, Dad is in bed with Judy. In fact, Dad spends most of the day in bed with Judy. This sent the counselors into a bit of a spin, though they wouldn't let my parents explain the situation. We were kept there for hours, until my sister said she's not jealous of Judy at all, because when we go to the beach when someone throws a ball, Judy always brings it back to her. When it was cleared up that Judy was the family dog and that my dad worked nights, we were allowed to leave. When my niece was 8 or 9, she once said pretty much unprompted at a family dinner, when two lovely fillies kiss each other, they have to be careful about diseases. After a pretty stunned silent few seconds, she was asked what she was talking about and said, "I saw it on some videos on the internet." My GF suddenly started laughing as she finally figured out she was talking about My Little Pony shows. Apparently they have an episode about cold sores or something. Well, I guess that or my niece is secretly watching 1920s English lesbian porn. One of my daughter's kindergarten journal prompts was write something special you do with one parent. She put, "Doing lines with Daddy." Drawing. She meant drawing. It's the emphasis that really made it. I was in the car with my BF's kids, and everyone was laughing and joking around about nothing in particular when the 11-year-old, who had been quiet, suddenly said, "I commit tax fraud. I call her the queen of non-sequiturs." I did this exact thing when I was younger. My mother and I were at Walmart and my dad would often get home before us. So I said, quite loudly, in a Walmart, "Why does Daddy always beat us?" to my mom. Thankfully no one heard, or didn't care enough to do something about it. This would be my brother's TIFU. When I was a kid, me and my bro were horsing around and I fell, cutting my head open. Anyone who has seen a head wound knows they bleed like 10x more than a similar wound anywhere else. So I was sort of curled in on myself, holding my head, and my mom walks in and asks what is going on. He says, "Mom, I killed Lunalnalani." My mom about had a heart attack. All told, it was like 3 stitches and no big deal, but yeah, kids just roll with whatever is on their mind, exactly as they are thinking it. XD. And I hope when you got home, you gave both of them a nice beating. Because my youngest kid has a tendency to put his hands in his mouth all the time and already been quite sick with the cold recently. We have been going strong on hand sanitizing recently. Asked my wife if they use it when they come home in the afternoon every day as they should, and yes they have. Then apparently he has said in daycare, Mom gives us alcohol every day when we get home. They had had some questions last time she picked him up. XD. Man, your lead-up had me worried that you were some reformed wife-beater who was sharing his turnaround moment. Haha, my brother and I did something similar when we were small, like 2-4 years old. My dad had gone on a long cycling trip to France, so he was gone for a few days and staying in a hotel, something that we thought was really cool as small children. When we came into daycare the day after he left, we told everyone that our dad had left and was sleeping in a hotel. My mom was very confused when she came to pick us up, and everyone told her they were so sorry about the divorce. When my oldest was around 4 or 5, he's 30 now, he had a habit of running off to the toy section when we went to Walmart or Kmart. As soon as our attention was turned, we'd have to hunt him down and carry him back to where we needed to be. One day he decided to take it a step further and started yelling, "Help me, help me," at the top of his lungs. Since we just started shopping, we just said the hell with this and carried him kicking and screaming out of the store. To this day I don't know if I'm more relieved that nobody tried to stop us call the cops than I am upset that nobody tried to stop us call the cops. Deleted. Nowadays that S would have triggered an investigation. Luckily most older people get that kids can just blurt out things that make no sense. Apparently when I was around 3 years old, my mom and I were walking into a store and she tried to race me inside. She yelled out, "I'm going to beat you," and I immediately dropped to the ground and started sobbing and begging her not to beat me. She still never lets me forget how much I embarrassed her that day. Lol. I work for a government agency that also has a preschool as part of its services. I had 2 daughters in that program at the same time. I think they were 4 and 5. I'm the IT guy for this agency, so occasionally I'd be working on something in the room the girls were in. One day I get there, and the teacher and 2 aides, they have kids with DD issues in the rooms as well, though mine are typicals. They come up to me, wanting to talk about why I was locking my girls in the dark basement, with no light, no nothing. They had very serious looks on their faces, and I'm about to freak out. Thankfully, they all laughed and said, "You're lucky we know you, and what kind of father you are." I have 6 kids altogether, and everyone knows how much I love my babies. Anyway, the girls were talking about when we play a game they love to play. I pretend to be a monster, and chase them all over the house. When I catch one, I throw them in the dungeon. Our basement had a landing on ground level, before going down to the main basement. I dragged them to this and set them on the steps, carpeted. Dragging as they fought to get away was mandatory. This landing had a door, with a huge window, so there was plenty of light there. So I feel you on kids saying things that sound terrible. A teacher of mine once told parents if they promised not to believe half the things we told them about her, then she wouldn't believe half the things we told her about them. Me and my now ex used to play fight with my son all the time. When he was 5, he watched something about Shaolin training and would ask us to slap and punch him all over his body to toughen him up. We did. Not hard, but not lightly either. Never enough to actually hurt him. We were going to get interviewed by a social worker for a home study, and I knew he would be talked to as well. Since he loves to leave out important details, I asked him earlier that day what he would say if she asked if we ever hit him. He said he would say yes, but it was just pretend hitting. I said, "Good. Make sure you leave that little detail about the pretend in there." Fast forward to the interview. We were asked to step out of the room while she talked to him, but we could still hear him. She began by asking how he was. He immediately responded, There is something that you need to know. My mom and dad hit me, but it's just for fun. Woman with medium light skin tone face palming. She hesitated a little but continued, asking him about rules he had to follow and how he was punished if he didn't. He happily shared about how he punished his animals by handcuffing them and putting them in timed out for 2 hours. Luckily she didn't ask him many questions, or he would have eventually told her all about the time I let him drink alcohol. It was 1 drop of a pre-mixed store-bought Bahama Mama. I used a straw to put 1 drop onto his tongue because he wanted to taste it, but he told people for years his mommy let him drink. It was around this time that he used to say he would deal with his future 10 children by putting them in their cages if they misbehaved, but he didn't mention them during the interview. Note: he has never been handcuffed as punishment, timeouts were never more minutes than his age, and he has never been put in a cage. I would always tell my son not to touch anything when I took him into the public bathroom stall because they're gross. So when my now wife took him into a public bathroom, he was probably 4 years old. He proceeded to tell her repeatedly, "You can touch something if you want to, you can touch whatever you want." Loud enough for other women in the bathroom to hear. My wife was mortified, confused and felt very awkward when they left. "So have you stopped beating your family?" I said something similar to a social worker when I first moved in with my grandparents. She asked if I was happy with them, and I replied, "Yeah, except when Granddad beats me up." Thankfully she had a sense of humor, seeing as I was sat on his knee at the time. Looking back now, it makes me laugh, knowing how mortified my grandparents must be been. Having an arsehole sense of humor runs in the family, I guess, and 6-year-old me picked it up pretty quickly. When I was young, I must have been 13 or something, we used to make these extravagant treasure hunts for our birthday parties, and it was my sister's birthday and I had made this complicated story and they had to get to the forest and meet the princess from another dimension, but first get past the gatekeeper. And I played the princess and my dad was playing the gatekeeper, and for the role he was wearing a turban and a Turkish kind of vest, and he is pretty big and has a big beard. So we went to the forest together so we could play our roles, and he was putting face paint on me and he put a color that I didn't want, so I yelled at him, "I don't want that, I don't want that," and apparently at that moment a woman biked by and she went to the police. So this party ran into the woman and 2 police officers in the forest, and they asked if they had seen a big man with a turban and a little girl. And my mom kind of realized what was going on, so she asked them, "Oh, are you also looking for the princess from the other dimension?" Luckily they realized that it was a misunderstanding, but I think it must have been pretty cool for the kids that the police was even looking for this princess. And also, I'm happy they died and come arrest my dad. This isn't AF up at all, nothing happens. Man, I breathed a sigh of relief when I got to the penultimate paragraph. /r/TIFU, greater than obligatory. This happened about 18 years ago. The real /r/TIFU is that you posted some long-ass life story that could have easily been delivered in 3 to 4 sentences about a non-F-up that occurred 18 years ago on a subreddit called Today I F-ed Up. When my daughter was younger, she decided to test out one of the stranger danger safety tips she had learned at school while we're shopping at Lowe's. Out of nowhere, she starts repeatedly saying in a not-so-quiet tone, "This is not my mommy. This is not my daddy." Thank goodness we were the only ones on that aisle at the time. Years ago, I was probably 9, my family, mom, dad, little sister, and I were crossing into Canada for a weekend vacation. I could At that age, read people pretty well and I used that tool as best I could because nobody expects a little kid to get the nuances of people's attitudes and how to act differently to play a joke. Usually, we pull up to the border and they ask us to pull over and come inside. Standard procedure for groups with kids. Making sure no human trafficking. We go in and meet a guy I can read is jolly like Santa. He smiles at me and my sister and greets us warmly. I can tell he's seen a lot of nervous kids thinking there's something wrong and he knows how to make people at ease. He explains to my dad that again, this is just standard procedure, just gonna ask a few questions and I cut him off and point at my dad and clearly say I don't know this. Man, my dad goes white. My mom lets out a surprised yelp of a scream. The border agent is staring at me slack-jawed. Then he sees my slight grin of an asshole kid and bursts out laughing. He's crying laughing as he sends us on our way and mentions that if the guy that he took the shift over for was here things would have gone differently. My dad was shaking for an hour and never let me live it down that it was an asshole thing for a kid to do. It still comes up. I'm in my late 30s. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to hear more of the best posts.